My beloved child, something changed inside their heart when the room became quiet and there was no one left to distract them from the truth. It did not happen during a dramatic confrontation. There was no perfect song playing, no sudden message glowing across their screen, no voice telling them what to feel. It happened in the ordinary stillness of an evening when they reached for something familiar and realized that nearly every familiar thing somehow carried a trace of you. They had spent the day convincing themselves they were fine. They answered questions with practiced ease. They smiled at the right moments. They moved through conversations as though nothing important was missing. To anyone watching, they appeared completely in control. But beneath that calm surface, one quiet thought kept returning with greater force each time they pushed it away. Why did everything feel less meaningful when you were not part of it? At first, they dismissed the question. They told themselves they were simply tired. They blamed the long day, the restless night before, the uncertainty they had been carrying about other parts of their life. But then they walked past a place that reminded them of you, and their steps slowed without permission. It was such a small place. Perhaps a corner table near a window. Perhaps a sidewalk where the evening light always seemed softer. Perhaps a store where you once paused to look at something you never bought. Nothing about the location should have held power over them, yet the memory arrived so vividly that for one suspended second, they could almost hear your voice beside them. They remembered the exact way you had looked at them. Not with admiration meant to flatter them. Not with curiosity meant to study them. You had looked at them as though you could see the person beneath all the careful layers, and somehow you had not turned away. That memory unsettled them. Because they had been seen before, but rarely understood. People had praised their strengths while ignoring their exhaustion. Others had enjoyed their company without noticing how hard they worked to keep everyone comfortable. Some had loved the version of them that required nothing, questioned nothing, and never admitted fear. But you had noticed the spaces between their words. You had recognized when their laughter was genuine and when it was simply a shield. You had heard the change in their voice when they said, "I'm okay," and knew they were asking to be believed because the alternative felt too vulnerable. And now, standing in that ordinary place, your soulmate realized something they had never allowed themselves to fully consider. You did not merely make them feel wanted. You made them feel safe enough to be real. The realization followed them home. They placed their keys down, but the sound seemed unusually loud in the empty room. They turned on a light, then another, though they were not afraid of the darkness. They were afraid of the thoughts waiting inside it. So they moved restlessly, opening cabinets without needing anything, checking their phone without reading the notifications, replaying old conversations in fragments. One memory came back more clearly than the others. You had once asked them a simple question. What do you really want? At the time, they had avoided answering. They may have laughed, changed the subject, or given you a response that sounded sensible but revealed nothing. You had not forced them. You had only held their gaze for a moment longer, as though you already knew that the honest answer frightened them. That question returned now with new weight. What did they really want? They had spent so much of their life choosing what was practical, what was expected, what would cause the least disruption. They had learned how to survive by staying several steps ahead of disappointment. Wanting something deeply had always felt dangerous because deep desire created the possibility of deep loss. And you had become the one thing they could no longer pretend not to want. This frightened them more than distance ever had. Your soulmate sat at the edge of their bed and looked down at their hands. They remembered the moments they had held back from you. The words they nearly said. The affection they concealed behind humor. The invitations they almost extended. The apologies they rehearsed and then swallowed because pride told them there would always be another opportunity. But what if there was not? That question entered their mind like cold air through an open window. For the first time, they considered the possibility that your patience was not endless. Not because your love was shallow, but because you had finally begun learning that love should not require you to abandon yourself. They sensed that something in you had shifted. You were no longer standing in the same emotional doorway, waiting for them to choose courage. You had grown quieter. Not bitter. Not cruel. Just quieter. And they understood the difference. Your silence was not an attempt to punish them. It was the sound of your heart beginning to protect the peace it had fought so hard to regain. That was the moment the energy changed. Until then, your soulmate had believed they were the one controlling the distance. They had imagined they could return when they felt ready, speak when the words became easier, and explain themselves once fear no longer complicated everything. But now they saw the truth. Time had not been waiting for them. You had been changing within it. They rose suddenly and crossed the room, almost as though movement could keep the realization from settling too deeply. Their phone was nearby. Your name was there, familiar and powerful, carrying more emotion than any collection of letters should be able to hold. Their thumb hovered over it. For several seconds, they considered reaching out. Then the old fear spoke. What if you did not answer? What if you answered politely but without warmth? What if the tenderness they remembered had already become something you only associated with the past? They set the phone down. But this time, avoiding the conversation did not bring relief. It made the ache sharper. Your soulmate finally understood that silence was no longer protecting them. It was costing them the very connection they were terrified to lose. They walked toward the window and stared at the reflection in the glass. Outside, cars moved through the streets. Lights appeared and disappeared. Somewhere, people were returning to homes where they felt known. Somewhere, someone was saying the words they had been too afraid to say. And in that reflection, your soulmate saw a version of themselves they could no longer defend. They saw the hesitation that had confused you. They saw the mixed signals that had left you questioning your worth. They saw how often you had offered sincerity while they answered with caution. Yet they also saw something else, something that kept the moment from becoming only regret. They saw that their fear had never been proof that they felt too little. It had been proof that they felt far more than they knew how to carry. You had entered their life differently from everyone else. You had not simply added happiness to their days. You had exposed the parts of them that had been surviving without tenderness. You made them imagine a future they had once forbidden themselves from wanting. You awakened the desire to be chosen, not for what they could provide, perform, or pretend to be, but for who they were when all of that fell away. That kind of love demanded honesty. And honesty demanded change. Your soulmate had resisted this because change meant surrendering the emotional armor that had protected them for years. They had believed the armor made them strong. But now, as they stood alone in that room, they recognized what it had truly done. It had kept pain from entering. But it had also kept you from reaching them completely. A memory surfaced from one of your last meaningful conversations. Your voice had been calm, but there was a tiredness beneath it. "I don't need you to have everything figured out," you had said. "I just need to know I'm not the only one who feels this." They had heard your words then, but they had not understood the courage behind them. You had not been asking for a promise. You had been offering them a doorway. And they had stood before it, silent. Now they could finally feel what that silence must have done to you. They imagined you afterward, carrying your own questions into the night. They imagined you replaying the conversation, wondering whether you had said too much. They imagined you blaming your openness when the real issue had been their inability to meet it. Their chest tightened. For the first time, your soulmate stopped focusing on what they might lose and began understanding what you had already endured. You had cared for them without clear reassurance. You had sensed the truth even when they concealed it. You had respected their fear, but their fear had not always respected your heart. That realization humbled them. They returned to the phone. This time, they picked it up with both hands, as though the moment required steadiness. They opened your conversation and scrolled upward, not searching for anything specific. They simply needed evidence that what existed between you had been real. There it was. Your humor. Your concern. The small details you remembered about their life. The way you encouraged them before important moments. The way you never made their vulnerabilities feel embarrassing. And then they found one message they had read many times but never truly received. You had written, "You don't have to impress me. I already care about the person you are when nobody is watching." Your soulmate read the sentence once. Then again. The room seemed to disappear around them. Because that was the hidden center of everything. They had spent years trying to become impressive enough to deserve love while you had been loving the unguarded person beneath the performance. They had feared that letting you closer would reveal something unworthy, yet you had already seen their uncertainty, their contradictions, their imperfections, and your care had remained. A tear slipped down their face before they realized they were crying. It was not only sadness. It was recognition. They finally understood why other connections had felt temporary beside what they shared with you. Others may have admired their image, but you had protected their humanity. Others had asked what they could offer, but you had wondered what they needed. Others had been drawn to their confidence, but you had stayed gentle when their confidence disappeared. You had become part of the way they understood comfort. Part of the way they imagined home. Part of the future they secretly pictured whenever they let themselves believe happiness might be possible. And suddenly, the thought of losing you did not feel like losing one relationship. It felt like losing the one place where their soul had learned it did not have to hide. That was when they made a decision. Not a dramatic decision born from panic. Not a temporary promise made to escape guilt. Something quieter and far more serious began forming inside them. They would no longer allow fear to speak on behalf of their heart. They would tell you the truth. Not the polished truth. Not the version designed to protect their pride. They would tell you that your absence had revealed your importance. They would tell you that every attempt to minimize what they felt had only made your presence more undeniable. They would tell you they remembered the moments you thought they had forgotten. But before they could begin, something unexpected happened. A new message appeared on their screen. It was not from you. It came from someone who knew both of you, someone who had been watching the distance grow and had remained silent until now. Your soulmate opened it. The first sentence made them sit completely still. I think you need to know what they almost did for you. Their heartbeat changed. They read the line again, confused by the words and unsettled by the urgency behind them. Almost did? What had you planned? What had you been carrying without telling them? A second message arrived before they could respond. What you believe about their silence is not the full story. Your soulmate felt the air leave their lungs. Until that moment, they had assumed your quietness meant you were moving on. They had prepared themselves for the possibility that they had waited too long. But now another explanation had appeared, one that connected your silence to something they had never known. Their fingers moved quickly across the screen. What are you talking about? The reply did not come immediately. Those few seconds felt endless. Then the typing symbol appeared. Stopped. Appeared again. And finally, the message arrived. They were ready to change everything for you. But something happened the night before they planned to tell you. Your soulmate stared at the words, unable to move. A forgotten detail returned to them the night you suddenly became distant, the conversation that ended sooner than expected, the strange sadness in your voice when you said you needed time. They had believed you were pulling away because your feelings had changed. But what if you had been protecting them from something? What if your silence had never meant you cared less? The next message began to appear, and as your soulmate watched the words forming on the screen, they realized that what they were about to learn would not only explain why you disappeared emotionally. It would reveal just how much you had been willing to sacrifice for them and why you had decided they could never know. My beloved child, the words remained on the screen, glowing softly in the quiet room as though time itself had slowed to allow your soulmate one final chance to understand what had been hidden for so long. Their hands trembled. Not because they feared the truth. Because they suddenly realized they had been living beside it without ever seeing it. Another message arrived. They never stopped loving you. They stepped back because they believed it was the only way to protect your future. Your soulmate read the sentence over and over until every word settled into their heart. Protect your future? Nothing about that made sense. Not yet. They replied almost instantly. What happened? The answer came slowly, as though the person on the other side understood that some truths deserved to arrive gently. The night before they planned to tell you everything, they learned something that made them believe they would become a burden in your life. They thought loving you meant letting you go before their struggle became yours. Your soulmate closed their eyes. Fragments of forgotten memories rushed together like scattered pieces finally finding their place. The cancelled plans. The hesitant smile. The conversations that suddenly became shorter. The way you had tried so hard to sound hopeful while quietly carrying something you refused to place on anyone else's shoulders. You had never stopped caring. You had simply chosen silence because you believed sacrifice looked more loving than honesty. For a long moment, your soulmate could not speak. They finally understood that while they had been afraid of rejection, you had been afraid of hurting them. Two hearts had been protecting each other. And in doing so, both had wandered into loneliness. The realization did not fill them with regret alone. It filled them with compassion. They no longer wished they could rewrite every conversation or erase every misunderstanding. Instead, they wished they had asked one more question. They wished they had looked beyond your brave smile and gently said, "Tell me what you're carrying. You don't have to carry it alone." At that moment, they understood something that changed them forever. Real love is not proven when everything is easy. It is revealed when someone is willing to remain present after discovering another person's hidden fears. You had tried to protect them. They now wanted to protect you. Not from life. Not from every difficulty. But from believing you had to face those difficulties alone. They picked up their keys. For the first time in a very long while, they were no longer waiting for certainty. They were choosing courage. The drive felt different from any journey they had taken before. The roads were familiar, yet every passing light seemed to whisper that this moment mattered. Their heartbeat no longer raced because of fear. It raced because hope had finally become stronger than hesitation. As they traveled, memories unfolded one after another. The first genuine laugh you shared. The quiet conversations that lasted longer than either of you intended. The comfortable silence where neither of you felt the need to impress the other. The moments when simply sitting beside one another felt enough. They smiled through tears. Not because the memories belonged to the past. Because they realized those memories had quietly been building a future neither of you fully understood. Meanwhile, you were somewhere else, looking out at another evening sky. You had convinced yourself that life would continue. You had accepted that some questions might never receive answers. You had stopped expecting unexpected messages. Not because your heart had become cold. Because you believed peace required releasing what you could not control. Yet even in that peaceful surrender, one small part of your heart still whispered a prayer you barely admitted to yourself. I hope they're okay. That simple wish revealed something beautiful. Love had never disappeared. It had simply become quieter. Gentler. More patient. Your soulmate finally arrived. They stood outside for several moments, breathing deeply. Every excuse they had once relied upon suddenly felt meaningless. No carefully prepared speech could express what they truly needed to say. Only honesty could. When the moment finally came, your eyes met again. Neither of you rushed forward. Neither of you immediately spoke. Sometimes the deepest conversations begin in silence. Within that silence, you both noticed something extraordinary. The walls were gone. No performances. No emotional armor. No pretending to be unaffected. Only two people standing before one another exactly as they were. Your soulmate's voice broke first. I thought I was protecting myself. A quiet tear slipped down before they continued. But all I really did was create distance from the one person who always made me feel safe. You listened. Not to judge. Not to remind them of old pain. Simply to understand. Then they shared everything. Their fears. Their hesitation. Their mistaken belief that waiting would somehow make love easier. Then they looked directly into your eyes and whispered the truth they had hidden for far too long. I finally understand how much you truly mean to me. No dramatic music filled the air. No crowd applauded. No miracle interrupted the moment. The miracle had already happened. Two hearts had finally chosen honesty over fear. You smiled through your own tears. Not because every wound had instantly disappeared. Healing is rarely immediate. Trust grows one truthful moment at a time. But something precious returned that evening. Hope. Real hope. The kind built on truth instead of fantasy. You gently reached for their hand. Not because the future was guaranteed. Because both of you were finally willing to walk toward it together. The conversation lasted long after the stars appeared overhead. You spoke about the misunderstandings that had separated you. You apologized without defending yourselves. You forgave without keeping score. You laughed at moments that once seemed painfully confusing. Little by little, every unanswered question found its answer. Every silence found its voice. Every hidden fear stepped into the light. Neither of you was perfect. Neither of you had all the answers. But neither of you needed perfection anymore. You had discovered something infinitely more valuable. Two imperfect hearts choosing each other honestly. As the night grew still, your soulmate looked at you with a peaceful certainty they had never known before. They no longer loved you because you completed them. They loved you because your presence inspired them to become the most truthful version of themselves. That realization changed everything. Not because it erased every future challenge. Because it changed the way those challenges would be faced. No longer alone. No longer hiding. No longer assuming love required silence. Together. And that, my beloved child, is where the deepest journeys truly begin. Not at the first meeting. Not at the first confession. But at the moment two souls stop fearing vulnerability and begin building trust with open hands and open hearts. If this story found its way into your heart today, let it remind you of something beautiful. The greatest connections are not sustained by perfect timing. They are strengthened by courage, compassion, forgiveness, and the willingness to speak truth before fear speaks for you. May your heart always recognize love that brings peace instead of confusion. May you have the wisdom to listen beyond words, the patience to understand what another soul cannot yet say, and the courage to express your own heart while there is still time. May every path before you be filled with hope, healing, unexpected joy, and relationships rooted in honesty and kindness. May light surround your steps, peace guard your heart, and love lead you toward the future prepared for you. If this fictional inspirational story touched your soul, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need a reminder that genuine love grows strongest when truth replaces fear. Until we meet again, may hope remain with you, and may your heart never forget that even the quietest acts of love can change a life forever.